Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this webinar today. Uh, I'm very excited to be here today talking about a very important topic, risk-based vulnerability prioritization or management. Every time we have the opportunity to talk to our customers and potential customers, we hear this being one of the primary requirement or topic that is being talked about. So hopefully we will have some answers to some of those burning questions with respect to how vulnerabilities are prioritized, how do I effectively manage vulnerabilities, and how do I ensure that the vulnerabilities that are being discovered are efficiently or effectively remediated or mitigated. So my name is Chandra. I am the CEO and founder of SecPod Technologies. I have been running this organization for the past 15 years. Everything that we do at SecPod is preventing cyber attacks, and vulnerability management being one of the key requirement for cyber attack prevention. That is something that we have been pioneering at SecPod, providing an end-to-end platform for implementing vulnerability management program. I am joined today by cybersecurity expert Andrew Braunberg, principal analyst at Omdia. Welcome, Andrew, to this webinar. Thanks for being here. I would like you to do a quick introduction to yourself, and then let's get started on the topic.
Yeah, thank you very much, and great to be here. I love this topic, as you know. Andrew Bromberg. I've been over at Omdia a couple of years now, but I've been in the security analyst for, honestly, a couple decades now, at a few places. So this is something I've been doing, looking at particularly risk-based and proactive technology since I've been at Omdia for the last couple of years. So we think it's a really important topic.
Thank you. So, Andrew, our topic is risk-based vulnerability prioritization or vulnerability management. And so I know proactive security is something that you have been talking about for a while. And it's also something that is close to your heart, as I discovered during our multiple conversations in the past. So who better than you to talk about this particular topic? So I would like you to get started. And
absolutely, I'll take over and I'll advance past this. Let's see, I don't really want to do this one as a build. Well, I guess I could. So how did we get where we are? And again, if you've been around as long as Chandra and I, you probably remember the days when, folks were, pretty bullish on the idea that, we're going to be able to prevent breach. If we've got the right endpoint security controls in place, if we've got some firewalls in the right place, things will be good. That didn't last that long, honestly, until we, moved into this era of kind of assumed breach, right? Which what Omdia would call the reactive era, and this is folks building up their SOCs and getting their SIMs in place. And getting all their detection and response tools together and figuring out how to mitigate, post breach, right? It's just try to get in there, detect as early as possible. One thing to say when we shifted kind of to the reactive era is that none of those preventative technologies went away, right? I mean, security controls are very accretive. They do something well, but they're not going to solve all of your problems. And so when we moved to building out the SOCs, we didn't, again, all those firewalls are in place and all that anti-malware technology is in place, and it continues to evolve, right? Which is an important component too. The trouble with these technologies, particularly when we think about reactive solutions and SOC analysts, is it just doesn't scale well, right? And so we've had a kind of reset, thinking about how to get literally ahead of the problem, right? And that's where these proactive solutions come into play. And we'll talk about exactly, people put different components into that bucket, whatever it is they call it. But a risk-based vulnerability management to us is kind of a key, really kind of a linchpin for all of these solutions. And so we want to really kind of think about, what are we talking about first to level set, and then drill into risk-based and the need for prioritization, which for us is really, again, just kind of a key component of making this all work, because we're still going to have a scale problem. Okay, so proactive. One thing you'll notice looking at some of these is that, some of these technologies have been around for quite a while. I mean, legacy vulnerability management, it's a legacy technology. It's been around for a couple decades, So what we're going to be talking about is how it's being enhanced, how we're getting a new wave of tools that do those, those traditional provide that traditional functionality, but in new and in more efficient ways. Similarly, on the attack path management side, to the far right top there, we call it incident simulation and test. You can think of breach and attack simulation tools. These automated red teaming solutions you're seeing now, pen testing as a service. For security control optimization, validation, and again, attack path. Again, not necessarily new tools, just being consolidated and kind of productized in different ways. Attack surface management, seen a lot of activity there, and that's kind of going to be the baseline for a lot of this, is having these, whether they're external or the chasm tools, as they're often called, which are more inventory, I think. Really, it's hard to do anything until you've got that baseline of what your universe of digital assets is. And then we've also got to think more broadly when we're thinking about exposures, and we'll get into this in much more detail, than thinking just specifically about CVEs and software vulnerabilities. As the complexity of our digital environments expands, let's say in the cloud, for example, we get a different set of exposures we really need to think about. And maybe cloud security posture management is probably the most widely known. It's been around probably the longest, but we see other examples of that: application security posture management, data security posture management, etc. Again, we put those very firmly in the proactive camp, as we do anything around DevSecOps, right? So again, the idea is, let's get ahead of this problem. We don't need to think about these only once we're in production. Let's think about some of these potential concerns in development. So one thing I would say about all of these solutions is they shine a light on a growing problem, and they're giving you much more visibility into the things that potentially we need to worry about. And that's why we always come back to prioritization. And Omdia has done, a fair amount of research on this topic, primary research. This is a survey we did just a couple of months ago. And the question we're asking here is, how important is the ability to rank vulnerabilities and prioritize next action based on risk. And based on risk is something, keep that in mind, right? But the results are pretty obvious here. I mean, almost 80% of respondents think it's a critical capability today to handle their security workload today, and almost everybody else thinks it's at least important, right? So clearly, everybody has decided that prioritization needs to be figured out, and that's what folks like SecPod are up to. To just kind of, maybe hopefully not belabor it too much, but to think about, the why of that and the scale of the problem and the severity of the problem. I just pulled some data from the National Vulnerability Database that NIST maintains. You'll see the graphic on the right has got kind of annual number of CVEs registered, so software vulnerabilities registered every year. And you can see the number keeps going up and up. And this graph stops at 2021, but the 2022 number is even larger. We had over 25,000 registered CVEs. The idea, though, that 4 or 5 years ago we really saw a jump, though, is a trend that is obviously continuing, and certainly is in 2023 as well. So one part is scale of the problem. The other is severity, right? And so when you think about CVEs coming with a severity score, CVSS, we see, just looking at 2022 numbers, again, the last full year, that over 15% of all of those 25,000 were considered critical, and another, almost 35% were rated as high. So, if your first cut on how to prioritize is just thinking about addressing CVEs with a severity score above 7, which gets you into the high and critical range, you're not, okay, maybe you're cutting your problem in half, but you're certainly not making it addressable for most organizations. And so why do I say that? Well, there's some good data out there, and honestly, it's not Omdia data. I wish it was, but there's good data out there that shows the average organization, regardless of size, can address maybe 10 or 15% of their open vulnerabilities every month. And as we've seen, I mean, there's always a new queue coming in every month behind what you're working on. So you get to that kind of steady state where really most orgs are lucky to get up to maybe a 15% resolution rate every month. And so obviously you need something better than just using CVSS if you want to really address this problem from a prioritization point of view. Before we really drill into kind of the distinctions of these newer solutions, let's, again, maybe a quick level set. If you've probably got some sort of vulnerability management process in place. Hopefully these kind of general buckets look familiar to you and kind of how you're doing things. Obviously, you need to understand your asset inventory, know the vulnerabilities that are out in the universe, and kind of do that mapping with some vulnerability scanning. Then this enrichment, we'll talk about context much more here in a bit when we're thinking about prioritization, but that's really kind of the linchpin here between visibility, then enrichment and prioritization, and then moving to the right. Now, what do we do about it, right? Are there any temporary mitigations we might be able to use? Or do we have a patch we can put in place? And, importantly, can we convince the IT team or the asset owner that patch should actually be used? And that, requires some trust between those groups. And so, the complication, I think, historically with vulnerability management is that process and people really are just as important as technology. But as we'll see, if you can create a defendable risk-based approach to prioritization, that really helps you with that trust and transparency issue going forward and working with these other groups. And that, I think, is really the key to these solutions. So drilling in a bit to risk-based, again, there are some distinctions from the legacy tools. And again, prioritization is kind of the goal, right? Defendable prioritization. How do you get there? Well, you need that broader visibility. So, the old days of maybe just putting a network scanner, on-prem is not going to be sufficient anymore. That your digital assets are too dispersed. So we need a broader set of visibility, a broader set of scanners to get you that full view of your potential attack surface. And then, as I mentioned, context really is just such a critical issue. And that can be both context within the threat landscape that you need to address. And there's that, often described as a temporal component here. Is there a new exploit you need to consider for a particular CVE? That's really important information when you're thinking about prioritization. But also on the other side, there really needs to be an understanding of the business context around these assets, right? Where are the crown jewels of your business with respect to what you do as a business? There's obviously assets that are more critical than others that need a different level of security posture. So that context is just hyper important to bring to the risk-based vulnerability management story. And then on the back end, again, integrations, out to patch, or as we'll see, potentially other avenues of mitigation. And on that topic, I mean, I've done, patches. I guess in a perfect world, we'd all like to just patch and forget about the problem. But I think this audience, I'm sure, realizes that there can be multiple issues with patching. And so it's important, again, to really be able to justify those recommendations and to work closely with the teams doing that work. But it's also important to think about other potential mitigations. So there's obviously temporary patching that might be, if you understand your security controls in place, if your risk-based vulnerability management solution can take into account existing security controls, well, maybe your WAF or your IPS can help you with a virtual patch. And certainly there's perhaps a little more draconian, but certainly there's quarantine and segmentation options, either with zero trust network access, or maybe even some old NAC technology that can help you temporarily isolate some potential vulnerabilities in your infrastructure. And then, as much as we've been talking about, the need for and the complexities around, dealing with just software vulnerabilities, we really got to, again, take a step back and really understand that's just one of the exposures that the modern enterprise, I guess we could say, is it needs to consider. There's a couple of other classic examples, misconfigurations, particularly around cloud assets, and then credentials would be your other big bucket. So many breaches have a identity component that's just something else that if we're gonna be honest with ourselves about being able to prioritize based on risk, we need to be able to make sure we're looking at a big enough view of that attack surface, right? And that's the whole point of the exercise. So how are folks doing prioritization? And Chandra, I see I'm going to try not to run over here, but I got a couple more slides. I'm going to
No
zip
problem. Still
through.
have
We
a good
okay?
time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've talked about CVSS quite a bit. I mean, look, it's been around 20 years, right? People know it. They understand it. It's a pretty simple solution approach. But it was never presented as a risk score. I mean, it's right in the name, right? I mean, the scoring is for severity. So I think to a degree it's been unfairly maligned. And there's certainly, and this is true with the 3.0 and beyond, you can augment that base score with these temporal and environmental components to help you get to a more of a risk score. But regardless, these other approaches have come out, and SSVC, particularly as a response to what those folks at Carnegie Mellon saw as deficiencies in using CVSS. And we're going to talk a lot more about that one here in a minute. But then EPSS is another one worth mentioning. This is much more of a niche kind of deliverable in the sense they want to make predictions, let's say over the next 30 days, of any CVEs that might be exploited in the wild, right? So again, and if we look and think about the known exploit vulnerability database from CISA, that has become in just a couple of years such a critical piece of people's kind of another really important arrow in a quiver, because the KEV there's got maybe 1,000 entries compared to over 200,000 in the national vulnerability database. Again, a nice reduction in what you need to kind of pay attention to. And EPSS is kind of similar, but looking over the horizon a little bit. So now I am long, and so I'm gonna set Chandra up here by just saying SSVC is really an interesting approach. It's really worth looking at. CISA is one of the kind of champions of it. It just takes a decision tree approach, very transparent. Just a couple of steps, usually in a tree, maybe 3 or 4, to get you to a set of actions, right? Which again is what we want to be able to do. We want to say, I've got this potential problem. How big is my risk? And then what should I do about it? And so there's some examples of a way you might set this up, going from kind of, well, don't worry about it at all, defer, to drop everything. We've got an immediate problem. And let's go address it. So there's me, Chandra. I'm gonna hand it off, and apologies for going a little long there.
No problem. Thanks a lot. So that was a wonderful conversation. And one thing I can't keep quite not talking about is the alignment of everything that you talked just about. There is a significant alignment with everything that we do at SecPod, or what we believe in at SecPod is there's a kind of perfect alignment. So thanks for setting the stage there. I have a couple of questions for you, Andrew, at this point. So this is the first time I saw someone trying to define what is proactive security and reactive security, prevention or preventative approach, because there's some terminology misuse in the industry. There's always this confusion of what is prevention, what is detection, response, etc. We also call ourselves a prevention company. So everything that we do is preventing cyber attacks. But I've also seen the detection and response companies calling themselves prevention. So that is something that there is always that confusion. Are you preventing the attack, or are you detecting and responding to that particular attack? So that confusion is always there. So you mentioned you put the prevention in between, and then there is on the left side proactive security, on the right side there is reactive security. So that's some bringing some amount of clarity. So for SecPod, I think we prevent cyber attacks implementing proactive approach, and I think for others they prevent cyber attack by detecting and responding. So what do you think about this confusion?
I think you are absolutely correct that there's a lot of confusion, but with thousands of security vendors out there, I guess it's no surprise. And I think the detection and response guys, I would, my recommendation to them is always that's not the right terminology. I mean, prevention, reduction, maybe, I think, is really more what they're doing, in the sense that if you're already, if the detection is an active breach, then are we really talking about prevention, right? In my mind, we are not, right? And so that's kind of, why we kind of put them on one side of prevention and proactive on the other side. One of the analogies we like to use at Omni is around kind of, this is a very American kind of association, but OSHA, those physical things when you're on a job site, if you're a construction worker maybe, and kind of how you go about trying to reduce risk, which we can associate with vulnerabilities. There's just a lot more utility in addressing that early in the proactive phase. When we get down to reactive, we're talking about kind of what they call PPE, right? Personal protective equipment. And it's just a different story. In a sense, that's preventative, I guess, but not really in my mind, that's for sure.
Yes, thanks for clarifying on that. So how do you, you're talking to a number of enterprises around the world. So how do you see this interest in proactive security? Reactive security or detection and response has always been cool. So you would invest quite a bit into those technologies, but there is an increasing trend in value of reactive security these days. But how do you see in your conversation with various people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we don't see reactive. I mean, people are shuttering up their socks and thinking they're going to solve all this immediately by just trying to get out ahead of these exposures. So it's going to be a slow transition, I think. But the amount of energy and questions we get around this is really, and again, I've been doing this for a couple of decades. It's as strong as any kind of idea that I've kind of encountered since I've been in the security field. And I think those questions we ask around prioritization, kind of start to get to that problem, right, or that need. And I just think these tools really have evolved. There's enough visibility into that entire attack surface. There is enough context to build reasonable models of risk. And I think that, another one is just, the fatigue in trying to keep the traditional kind of reactive tools manned, right? I mean, having enough analysts to throw at those tools. And the other is just trying to explain the ROI associated, right? It's just a really difficult conversation to have. I think we keep, as security practitioners, we keep, and this is, Chandra, this has been, we want a seat at the table as far as that, being in those broader business discussions. But we have a lot of trouble, being able to, quantify what the real risk is that we're facing or avoiding as cybersecurity folks. And so I think I think proactive tools hopefully get us to where we're making, if we can get to those really grounded risk-based discussions, will help us with this return on investment for these tools.
Thank you. All right. Let me build on what you have already talked about, and talk specifically about what we have been doing at SecPod and how our implementation looks like in the proactive security space. So risk prioritization, SSVC has defined a very beautiful framework, pretty simple. You feed in all the data points that are available from the various detections that you have had, and then it helps the SSVC framework helps categorize the vulnerabilities into 4 buckets: act, attend, track, star, and track. And to be able to categorize these vulnerabilities into these 4 buckets, you will have to obviously feed in various data points. One is all the vulnerabilities that are discovered across all the devices that are present within the organization's IT infrastructure and cloud, etc. And there's obviously the business context or the environmental context that you will have to feed in. Not every device is equal. Not every data points are equal in terms of confidentiality, etc. So you obviously have to prioritize those assets and feed that information. And if there is some intelligence available around which vulnerability is being exploited in the wild, you talked about CISA's KEV, and that can be a very valuable data point as well. So all of these information is fed into the framework's implementation, and then you have these category. And act obviously means that something that you must act upon right now. So maybe this is being exploited in the wild. Maybe this particular vulnerability is present on a very critical system or a device within the organization, and you must act upon. If you don't, there is definitely a possible attack. Attend is something that you would advance the patching or remediation cycle slightly ahead, because this vulnerabilities that are there in this particular bucket have the potential of moving quickly into the act category. So it's better we act upon now. Track star is something that you can mitigate the vulnerabilities as part of your patching cycle. And track is something that you can observe it over a period of time and see if they are moving into track star or attend or act, and continuously monitor the environment for that particular transition. So the decision tree is about 4 or 5 levels. So you have all the vulnerabilities that are discovered in the environment. Are they exploitable? If the answer is actively exploited in the wild, the next question is this vulnerability automatable in terms of exploitation? If the answer is yes, automatable is true, then if this particular vulnerability is exploited, what is the technical impact? If the technical impact is total, then you'll ask another question: is this vulnerability present on a system where the mission and well-being of the organization is going to be impacted if there is an attack were to occur? And if the answer is yes, obviously this is a vulnerability that you must act upon immediately, and it goes into the act category. And if there is a vulnerability where exploitation is not there, presently not available, nobody has seen an attack vector kind of using that particular vulnerability, the next question again is it automatable? If the answer is no, is it the technical impact is high or partial? And then if partial, then is it on a system which is on a mission and a critical system where the mission and well-being of the organization is going to be impacted? The answer is no, it goes into the track. So this is a pretty clever decision tree in my view. So it puts it into these 4 or 5 questions and then categorizes the vulnerabilities based on that. And at SecPod, this is our continuous vulnerability and exposure management framework that our platform Sailor now has implemented. So there is this prioritization layer that takes input from the detection layer, and the output is fed into the remediation layer. Starting from the beginning, so you have to get continuous visibility into the IT infrastructure. Security, its primary need is visibility. You must know what you're trying to safeguard. Once you have that visibility into the infrastructure, you can analyze all those data points and ask a lot of questions whether something is supposed to be there or not. And you can also apply some statistical analysis or computations on top of the data that is available to see if there are any outliers, more from posture point of view. If there are some unique systems that are configured very uniquely across all the other organizations that are all the other devices that are present in the environment, you may as well ask that why question and see if that is something that is necessary or not necessary. So we call this as posture anomaly, not anomaly in the detection sense, but more from the proactive sense, where posture configuration of the organization is in line or not. Then he gets into the detection. As Andrew also talked about, it's not just detecting CVE-based vulnerabilities. They are important, but at the same time, equally important are misconfigurations that are there, posture anomalies that we just talked about, or security controls that you may have already implemented, which are not probably functioning as you would want them to. So all of these, including the identity or privilege, high privileges that are associated with a particular user, each of these are vulnerabilities that one must pay equal attention to. So we detect all of these vulnerabilities and then feed that information into our prioritization layer. So the prioritization layer is based on the SSVC framework devised by CISA. And as I mentioned earlier, it categorizes into these four categories and then feed that information into the remediation layer. And when it comes to the remediation, it is not just patching the vulnerabilities. Obviously, patching can significantly reduce the number of vulnerabilities that are there. But equally important is fixing misconfigurations. Equally important is ensuring all of those why questions that we asked as part of the normalization layer. If there is something which is an anomaly, you must act upon. If security controls are not functioning as you would want them to, you must act upon. So each of these are security mitigations that you must apply to effectively remediate vulnerabilities or eliminate vulnerabilities. And then, of course, reporting is extremely important to demonstrate your posture compliance. And this process must be an automated routine. You can't have scanners running a scan once in a while and you know the vulnerability and then you're mitigating the vulnerabilities 5 months later. That is not going to work anymore. So this is the framework that we have implemented as part of our Saner Now Cyber Hygiene platform. Talking specifically about our prioritization layer, there is vulnerability scanner that is discovering all kinds of vulnerability from the environment. And there's also this environmental context or business context that I talked about. Is a particular mission critical? Is this exposed to the internet? Is it storing sensitive data? All of that information can be fed into the framework's decision making tree. In addition to that, we feed in vulnerability and threat intelligence if something is being actively exploited in the wild, if it is part of the CISA's KEV database, or if it is widely exploited as part of the threat intelligence that is available. So all of that information is fed into it. We also do MITRE attack mapping and an EPSS-based prediction system, an enhanced version of that to see if a particular vulnerability is having all the characteristics of other vulnerabilities that are being exploited already in the wild. There is also a risk categorization algorithm that we have devised at SecPod. So this information is fed into the SSVC framework, pass it through the decision tree, and then you get act, attend, track, star, and track. And this vulnerability is natively integrated into our remediation engine, where we have the patch management product, the remediation engine that can fix misconfiguration, apply security control, make changes to all the devices that are present within the organization environment to effectively remediate these vulnerabilities. So all of this kind of coming together into one single platform. So this is an interesting slide. I want to make a reference to one particular slide that you had showed, Andrew, that caught my attention is this one here. So if you look at the asset inventory, collect the vulnerability, perform scanning, and discover those vulnerability, and then enrich this discovery with all the intelligence to see what is the most critical vulnerabilities, categorize them, and then apply mitigation, whether it's temporary or a permanent application of patch, or even other remediations that you can apply, and then reporting. So if you go back to the framework that we talked about, this is exactly what we described. Implementation of that, and moving forward, this is exactly the same implementation. You have risk-based vulnerability management, where you're detecting vulnerabilities of all kind, feed that into the prioritization layer, where all the vulnerability intelligence, exploit intelligence, environmental context, everything becomes part of this analysis. Then feed that into the vulnerability remediation layer, where you have the ability to apply patches, test patches, validate these patches before applying, harden the system by fixing all the misconfigurations, and also apply additional security controls to ensure continuous compliance. So risk-based vulnerability management and risk-based remediation kind of acting in tandem to effectively implement a vulnerability management program end to end. Let me quickly showcase capabilities that I have been talking about through a very quick demo here. So this is our platform unified console. Everything that we talked about as part of the CVEM framework, from visibility to detection, prioritization, and remediation, coming together onto one single console. The visibility layer is all about giving continuous visibility to the environment, what devices are there, what network infrastructure is present, who joined, who exited the network, what kind of software applications are present, what services and processes are running, are there network ports that are open unnecessarily, how many users are currently active, what privileges they have, what groups they belong to. There are hundreds of questions that we answer as part of the visibility layer. And then moving into the detection, we of course detect software vulnerabilities, which are through CVEs and something called SVE that we have devised ourselves, where if a vulnerability is not part of the NVD database, we create our own enumeration and add into our database. So as part of vulnerability management, we discover all of those vulnerabilities. And then as part of compliance management, the misconfigurations that we have been talking about are identified. And there is also a posture anomaly where unusual, unwanted IT is kind of questioned and seen if those are necessary or not. So you can detect those anomalies and mitigate those, and also discover all the security patches that are missing in the environment. So this is what is covered as part of detection. And then we feed that information into the prioritization layer, where all of these vulnerabilities are categorized into these 4 buckets: act, attend, track, star, and track. And if you see this, the funnel, you always see that this ad tends to be the smallest, which goes on to say that in spite of number of vulnerabilities that are present in the environment, you only have to act upon these many on an immediate basis. Maybe advance the patching cycle for these many vulnerability, do these fixes as part of your regular patching cycle, and then wait on these vulnerabilities for some more time, because or you can track them to see if they are moving into these buckets in the near future. So this is the prioritization layer based on mission critical devices. High exploitability, is there automatable, total impact is high or not. So all of these questions are asked to determine which layer it belongs to. And finally, this information is fed into the remediation layer. So as part of the remediation layer, you can apply patches, you can apply misconfiguration fixes. All of that can be done, and you can track those activities within the same platform. So this is the unified console. We have 7 different products or tools coming together onto one single console. Asset exposure gives the detailed visibility into the environment. Posture anomaly lets you ask a lot of why questions, and if something is of an anomalous uh, character, you have the ability to fix them. Vulnerability management is all about identifying vulnerabilities, software vulnerability, misconfiguration, risk prioritization as part of the framework itself, and then the remediation layer that helps apply patches, fix misconfigurations, and endpoint management that will help go beyond patching. And of course, there's an interesting reporting layer as well that we mentioned earlier. So you have off-the-shelf reports for various compliance standards that you can just download and demonstrate compliance. At the same time, you can build your own reports by thousands of attributes, reportable parameters that you can just drag and drop and build your own report. That is a quick walkthrough into our platform. Coming back to the slide. So as you saw, I mean, in respective of the number of vulnerabilities that are there, we typically see millions of vulnerabilities discovered as soon as our platform is deployed. And then those vulnerabilities are categorized into 4 buckets. And this is one of the sample data that we, as you can see, 340K vulnerabilities, 725 of them are something that you must act upon now. So that gives you a significant power to go ahead and eliminate all of those vulnerabilities as quickly as possible, and then start talking about attend, track, star, on track. So this helps kind of streamline all of these vulnerabilities, and effective remediation can be implemented. So one of the challenge that we repeatedly hear from the customers and the prospects that we talked about across different category of verticals and enterprises and the mid segment, the vulnerability scanners are throwing up millions of vulnerability that translates into hundreds of thousands of tickets, and we're always playing that catching up game in case where tickets are available. Otherwise, there is a vulnerability report that runs into thousands of pages that is offloaded into the IT operations team. They have to figure out how to fix all of those vulnerabilities, and they have that $1 million question: where do I start the remediation? And so that has been a burning problem for most of the prospects that we talk about across industries. And also, there is always this confusion about false positive. Is it really a false positive or not? So some vulnerability scanner reports that to be a vulnerability, and IT operations team may have actually fixed all the vulnerabilities in effect, but you'll have to have some proof to go back to them and say, I've actually fixed it. So the disconnected process of scanners and mitigation engine, not coming together. And these days, risk prioritization has become another category. There is vulnerability scanner, there is risk prioritization products, and there is mitigation, multiples of mitigation products. All of these operating in silo, kind of making this extremely difficult to implement an effective vulnerability management program. And that is why attackers have an easy job. I mean, every attacker leverages those weaknesses. If the weaknesses are not eliminated, they have an open door to come into the organization and launch these attacks much easier than other forms of attacks. So, now risk prioritization that is coupled with the detection of vulnerabilities as well as mitigation of vulnerabilities is implemented. The SSVC-based vulnerability prioritization framework. It takes in various input terms of data, environmental context, business context, vulnerability intelligence, threat intelligence, prediction, machine learning, and risk categorization, all of this into account to streamline the remediation process with an integrated vulnerability mitigation and vulnerability remediation engine part of our framework, part of our platform. All right, open to questions at this point in time. Let me see if... Okay, one of the questions that I see is how to move from CVSS to SSVC model. What is the process? Is it complex? Do you want to take that, Andrew, or you want me to?
Well, I think, I'm glad we got that because I think you did a better job than I did on that conversation around, or that example of kind of, those prioritization schemes don't have to be one or the other. And I think you showed that really well. With an SSVC approach, you can take EPSS, you can take KEV, and you can use those as contexts and inputs into your decision tree matrix. And I think that's really the way to think about this. CVSS, I think, typically is used in a similar way. It's kind of a pre-filter maybe. Although I would say, one of the things about EPSS and CVSS is they don't always align on severity. So, but I don't think we need to think about them as either all or, and I think you showed that really well.
That's correct. So there's no replacement of CVSS in the risk prioritization. You take that as an input and feed that into the SSVC model. That is the power of SSVC in my view, because it doesn't really worry about replacing any of the existing technology. It is a framework that helps categorize these vulnerabilities. So CVSS is definitely an input. EPSS is definitely an input. CISA's KVE can be a very powerful intelligence input that can come in. So all of this, including there's one another point probably I missed, which is, not every vulnerability is equal. Even though the same vulnerability is there on two different systems, one system you may have implemented some tighter security controls. In the other system, you may not have. One of the examples that I would like to take is, for example, DEP is disabled on one system and enabled on another system. Same vulnerability existing on these two systems. On one system where DEP is enabled, attackers have no chance to exploit it. On the other system where it is disabled, it becomes easier to launch attacks. So, that way I think SSVC is kind of giving you that framework to implement a risk prioritization.
And I would really just reemphasize that visibility and context of your particular environment is just so critical to being able to make accurate risk assessments in to inform your prioritization. It's just really, and as we see, I mean, some of the more temporal bits around threat landscape, I think we could say are becoming a bit more commoditized, right? EPSS is available, KEV is available, and just having a partner who really understands your particular environment. I really am impressed on the backside too around the remediation. Just that real care you see in that life cycle, I think, is another thing that's just really, again, really important. Just to make sure that it's the things, the recommendations are implemented correctly. And as smoothly as possible, because this is a numbers game, even with the prioritization, right? It's a numbers game.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, any automation, it's key.
Thank you. There's one other question. As we utilize Microsoft 365 products, particularly Microsoft Defender, we have compiled a list of CVSS related to software updates. In light of this, I'm inquiring whether there's a dedicated software solution available that specializes in vulnerability management, offers automated update to address these vulnerabilities. Yes, I think you're in the right webinar, certainly. So Saner Now is the platform to help you prioritize those vulnerabilities and mitigate all of those vulnerabilities that are discovered either by our platform or by Microsoft Defender or any other competing product. So you would be able to streamline all of that, prioritize those vulnerabilities, and remediate those vulnerabilities within our Saner Now platform. There's another question around what are the business drivers for risk prioritization? Andrew, do you want to take that?
Well, I mean, the business drivers to me are very well. I mean, I think it's trying to address the scale of the problem that we're dealing with is one. So if you look at it as drivers compared to legacy vulnerability management, certainly it just does not scale. I mean, there's no other way to say you need prioritization and you need that to be defendable. But I mean, going back to the kind of different eras, I think we can say the same thing around just that absolute fatigue around reactionary approaches. It's just a kind of a step back saying, we just need a better way to do this. There aren't enough bodies literally in the world to throw at the approach if we do it from a reactive point of view. And so I think that is, I guess maybe one other quick, I would say, I think there's just a lot more visibility into the capabilities here. I would give maybe, MITRE ATT&CK some credit for doing that work of getting folks aware of, that attack chain and the fact that, there are some preliminary, pre-network, penetration. There's a few steps before then. Maybe we should get some more visibility out there too. So it's probably a lot of things, but I think there's definitely more awareness there. Give MITRE a little credit. And then general fatigue to me, it's just the real driver.
Yes, certainly. One more question. Does SSVC has any drawbacks?
Well, you probably are the practitioner on that. What would you say there? I'm curious.
Yeah. So we have implemented the framework. We really love it. Obviously, everything that we kind of asked for was kind of available in the SSVC framework. So the day we kind of decided that risk prioritization is key, talking to various customers and prospects, we kind of looked around and it kind of was available readily for us to implement. Of course, it is a framework. It is not a tool that can be integrated into, right? So we went about doing it and it seems to work perfectly well at this point in time. What I think there is one ambiguity in the risk management in particular something that many people have probably pondered around is the risk quantification. I don't think it is supposed to be part of the SSVC scope. There's always this ambiguity, and each of us are trying to score risks in our own way and quantify risks in our own way. So I think one industry drawback is risk quantification. So there's no mathematics available for risk quantification that is clear, as clear as SSVC.
Yeah, we need a whole other hour to have that conversation around risk quantification. But I would say there is a lot of utility in just this operationally thinking about next best action, right? And again, it's a big conversation, but I agree with what you're saying, but I think even without trying to quantify or justify beyond the operational teams, that this really provides real value.
All right. Thank you. I think we have come to the end. It's time now. So we had a few more questions. I think we can take those offline. Thank you very much, Andrew, to be part of this session. I really had a good time talking to you. And
always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure some of the viewers have really got some benefits out of this session. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this session. We will be sharing this recording to everyone who subscribed to our webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to send us a mail or try out our platform at secpod.com. Thanks for your time once again.